Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, a strange homeowner association built a well on my property while I was gone. This HOA caused a massive sinkhole and my house literally collapsed. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the neighbor's story. The first one starts like this. I live in East Asia and I'm seeing more HOAs than ever before. I personally don't understand the appeal and why it became so popular here. The area I lived in did not have any types of problems with safety or the community being connected. It just seems like a waste of time and money, but who knows, maybe I'm just missing something obvious. The neighborhood right near me got an HOA about 5 years ago and it started nothing but problems for me. So my farm is less in the neighborhood and more so next to it, close enough that I know a lot of the people and feel part of that area and not alone. I shouldn't have been shocked when I was offered to join the HOA, but I was. The H in HOA stands for home after all, and I would be the only farm in the entire thing. I did not want to join for a couple of reasons. So, number one, the smaller one being that I didn't see the point and there was no benefit for me. The bigger issue was that the HOA expected me to join and pay more than any other person since my land was larger. Basically, paying for multiple homes worth since my land covered that amount. I refused, thinking that what they were asking was horrible. That was when they started bothering me to join and eventually coming to my house one day with a very strange offer. Something I had a feeling they planned from the beginning. HOA leader: I want to come and talk to you again about joining. Me: I told you before that I was not interested. HOA leader: I know that you were upset about the cost. So we came together and found a solution that I think is fair. You only have to pay for the single home worth, but in exchange the HOA can use your land. Me: use my land? HOA leader: yes. You see, we want to build a well and your property would be the smartest place to do it. Then everybody could have easier access to water and nobody would be inconvenienced. Me: I would be inconvenienced though, losing some of my own land and also having it become my responsibility. You're not building anything on my land and I'm not joining the HOA. HOA leader: I've tried to be nice, but you're making that impossible. We need this well built on your land and it's gonna happen even if you don't like it. You can make it easy and join the HOA, or you can make it hard and we will find a way to get your land. I did not like the threats she made and kicked her off of my farm. Wanting me to join just for the money was low in my mind. It was even lower to want me to join to take advantage of me and try to use my property for themselves. Before anybody gets upset at me, there's other access to water where we live. It is just not as convenient. There's nothing stopping them from building a well somewhere else though to attain the same goal. It doesn't have to be on my property, they just want it to be. After that blow up, the HOA avoided me for a while and things cooled down. I got a call from my family in China a few months later, and due to personal reasons I had to go back there. I didn't know how long I was gonna end up being gone, but it was roughly a year before I was able to return to my farm. Leaving a farm for that long and needing to basically start over is not ideal, but I didn't have much of a choice. I was expecting the place to not look great, but what I was not expecting was for my house to no longer be standing. Instead, half destroyed in a sinkhole. Something that might have looked like an accident if it wasn't for the very obvious well that was not there when I left. I'm getting a little ahead of myself though, so let's rewind and talk about what the HOA did while I was away. Once they realized I wasn't coming back anytime soon, they basically took over my property for themselves, trespassing on it and even letting anybody else go on the land as well, calling it the community farm like it didn't have an actual owner. Then, since I wasn't there to protest any longer, they built the well that I had forbade them from building on my property. That alone would have been enough for me to want to sue them. It turns out that whatever idiot decided where to put the well did not do any work in making sure it was a good spot. It was way too close to my house and not in a secure location. It resulted in the land becoming so weak that it created a sinkhole and my house just collapsed. They did nothing about this either, so by the time I came back it had been like that for months already. I was furious and contacted a lawyer in order to sue the HOA for building that well and destroying my land, going after the HOA leader in particular since I knew she was the one behind the entire thing. I was told that I had a good case with the well not being there when I left and the HOA having many public announcements about my land being the community farm. The lawsuit was for trespassing, illegally building on my property, and being responsible for the destruction of my land and home. The HOA leader tried to reason that I had been gone for so long, the only explanation was that I had either died or abandoned the property. The HOA merely took it over to make sure it stayed nice and an asset. This was total garbage, because when I left I made sure that I contacted the town to let them know to hold my mail and where I was going. If the farm really was abandoned, then the town would have been the ones to deal with it, not the HOA, since I was not even a member. Without that excuse to work off of, the rest of the case went in my favor rather quickly. The illegal well had no explanation besides the HOA claiming the neighborhood needed it, which by the way is not a reason that it had to be on my land, as I said before. They also caused the destruction and neglect of the land by letting the house collapse and then just leaving it to sit there in the hole, getting more destroyed by the day. The HOA had a case that was falling apart and decided to put the HOA leader under the bus to take the fall, claiming they all did what she said and had no idea about any of this. She was sent to jail for her criminal actions, and the HOA was forced to pay me money to help restore my land. The only thing was that since the HOA was still fairly new, I had essentially bankrupted them. They had no idea what to do, and since the neighborhood would be angry that all their money went to a lawsuit settlement, the HOA only could do one thing. They thankfully disbanded and continued to just tell everybody that it was the HOA leader's fault to try and save their own skin. It really shows what a nice group I didn't want to join, turning on their own just to save themselves. And yeah, ripe stars, I wouldn't wish these kinds of people on even my worst enemy, honestly. Either way, if you enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and maybe even post a comment, because it would help me tremendously. The next one is titled, "Neighbor assaulted me for planting garden too close to the property line." So I've always loved gardening. Ever since I was a little kid, I would help my grandpa tend to his vegetable patch and flower beds. There's just something so rewarding about nurturing plants from tiny seeds into lush, vibrant greenery. As an adult, I was eager to start my own garden, but living in an apartment meant my outdoor space was limited to a couple of pots on my balcony. That all changed last year when my wife and I bought our first house. It had a decent-sized backyard, and I couldn't wait to get my hands dirty, transforming it into my own little botanical oasis. I sketched out plans for raised vegetable beds, a flower border, and even a little pond feature. This was gonna be my gardener's paradise. On moving day, I went outside to survey the blank canvas awaiting me. Our backyard was separated from our neighbor John's by a chain link fence. John popped his head over and introduced himself. He seemed friendly enough at first. We made some small talk about me being new to the neighborhood before he disappeared back into his house. Over the next few weekends, I worked diligently on my garden. I built cedar frame beds and planted tomatoes, peppers, herbs, leafy greens, you name it. For the flowers, I chose a mix of colorful annuals like marigolds and zinnias. I also added a small decorative pond with a little bubbling fountain. On one Saturday morning, I was out pruning my tomato vines when John came stomping over from next door. His friendly demeanor was gone, replaced with a scowl. "That garden bed is too close to my fence," he barked at me. I walked over to examine it. The bed was about a foot away from the chain link barrier between our properties. Hardly what I would consider encroaching. I politely explained this to John, but he was having none of it. "I don't want your damn plants touching my fence," he yelled. "Move it or I'll dig up every last weed in there myself." This seemed like a rather extreme reaction, but I tried to keep the peace. "Okay, no problem. I can scoot it over a bit so nothing is touching the fence. Sorry about that. And trim back that stupid tree while you're at it," John snapped before stomping back to his house. I looked over at the young crepe myrtle I had just planted. It was barely knee-high and nowhere near the fence. But again, I didn't want any more confrontation, so I gave it a little haircut to keep him happy. Over the next few weeks, John became increasingly hostile. Anytime I was outside, he would come up with some ridiculous complaint. Apparently, my fountain was too loud and he didn't like the smell of my compost bin. He even took issue with the route I took while mowing the lawn, insisting I switch directions to blow the grass clippings back into my own yard. I did my best to pacify him, even though his demands became more and more absurd. I shuffled all my beds as far from the fence as I could, I limited the fountain to only daytime hours, and I rerouted the mowing pattern. But nothing satisfied Grumpy John. The last straw came one morning when I was harvesting carrots for dinner. John came barreling out of his house, cursing up a storm. He was clutching a garden hose, which he proceeded to point at me, spraying me right in the face and drenching my freshly picked veggies. "Keep your filthy weeds out of of my yard," he screamed as I shielded myself from the icy water. I looked down to see a single nasturtium vine had poked through the fence. One tiny stray foliage was apparently enough to send John into a rage. "That's it," I yelled back, finally at my limit. "I've tried to be reasonable, but you're taking this way too far over nothing." John's lips curled into a snarl and his beady eyes blazed with fury. He dropped the hose and lunged towards me, hands outstretched as if he was attempting to strangle me. Acting on pure instinct, I grabbed my metal trowel to block his attack. He ended up slamming his face right into it. The blow left him shrieking and blood pouring from his nose. "You psycho!" John howled, clutching his injured snout. "I'm calling the cops." Sure enough, a few minutes later I heard sirens approaching. An officer came and interviewed us both to get statements. I explained John's increasingly irrational behavior and how he had tried to assault me when I confronted him. "Is this true?" the cop asked John. "Did you initiate physical violence against your neighbor unprovoked?" "He was growing weeds," John cried defensively. "I had to keep them out of my yard." The officer sighed and asked if I wanted to press charges for the attempted attack. I decided it was not worth the hassle. Fortunately, he did warn John that any further incidents would lead to his arrest. After the authorities left, John quickly scurried back inside, clearly embarrassed by the whole debacle. He avoided me after that, discontinuing his watchdog routine. I doubt he wanted to risk another unsuccessful attack ending with a broken nose. Then one night I was startled awake by the shrill beep of the smoke detector. I rushed outside to find my beloved garden shed engulfed in flickering flames. As I stood there in shocked disbelief, John came barreling over. "Yeah, sorry about your shed," he said with a sneer, "but maybe all that fertilizer and gasoline you had stored in there wasn't safe." His admission stunned me, but before I could respond, the shriek of fire engine sirens filled the air. Within minutes, firefighters had the blaze extinguished. I told the police officer on scene that John had confessed to starting the fire. He was swiftly arrested and carted away in handcuffs. Thanks to John's reckless arson, I lost hundreds of dollars of tools and supplies along with my garden refuge. But the sweetest revenge came a few months later when I testified against him in court. The judge sentenced John to 5 years in prison for arson and destruction of property. With John safely behind bars, I happily replanted and rebuilt my garden oasis without fear of sabotage. His house sat vacant and neglected, overgrown with weeds that I left to flourish. After all his complaints about my plants, it felt poetic to let nature take back over the property of the man who tried to destroy my garden dreams. In the end, John's bitter jealousy and anger got him nothing but a prison jumpsuit. And the next one is titled "Satisfyingly Complied." I'm a corporate professional in middle management. My boss is a senior manager and he's horrible at his job. Peter principle totally applies. He's got his annual goals sent down from the corporate ether, and naturally, he added these things to my list of responsibilities. He would receive a hefty bonus for completing them. Meanwhile, I would receive none. He would take all the credit and tell me that I was lucky to have him as a mentor. He had this big shot personality. He was a smooth talker that acted like a celebrity, and he was just too important to be bothered by the people lower on the totem pole. He only wanted to interact with people he could brag about, and beyond puckering to kiss their behinds, he spent most of his time at work perusing dating apps. We were a very in-demand group within the company, and we had a revolving door of people coming to our area daily to get help from us. Non-management employees were not allowed to have cell phones and didn't have access to emails, so stopping in was their only option. My boss got furious if I wasn't in my office to catch all the traffic. Completing his goals for him required me to be out of my office. He demanded that I stay in my office for my full shift every single day and accused me of leaving the property and stealing company time, because if I wasn't in my office, how would he know that I was working? So then I complied. I stayed in my office. When his annual review came up, he lost his bonus because he didn't meet a single goal for the entire year. He fell under intense scrutiny. It was found that he was using company funds and resources to take these dating app encounters to expensive places and was expensing it as work-related. He also used company funds that were meant for a building upgrade to build a new patio at his house. He asked the contractor, a friend of his, to just do the work and find a way to add the money into the company bill. He was promptly fired. And the next one is another malicious compliance story. So I lived in a really horrible place that had an equally horrid property management team. I say team because they changed PMs whenever there was a problem. Nothing was ever done, and in the end there is a massive report against them with relevant authorities for their misconduct. But to the MC in question, property manager told me I had to have the carpets professionally cleaned, was not in the contract, or I would lose my $800 bond when I moved out. After some back and forth explaining I had used a professional carpet cleaning machine and was well experienced in doing vacate cleans, she insisted it must be an accredited carpet cleaner and that she would wait for an official receipt that had their ABN on it before approving the return for bond. I did some research and found out I could become an accredited carpet cleaner as there are no official licensing boards in my state. So I did what any sane person would do. I paid the $85, did the online course and got my certificate, registered a business name, ABN etc., all free via government program I was in at the time, handed the property management a copy of my accreditation and an invoice for services. I became a professional carpet cleaner and have since properly launched a vacate cleaning business that is still going 6 months later. And here Ripe Stars talk about the little guy getting absolutely perfect malicious compliance on the bad guy. Absolutely fascinating and really brilliant from OP. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. You know, when someone swears they are the most confident person in the room and talk about how not insecure they are. Or the type of person who swears they are not jealous of other people, but you can just hear their insecurities, jealousy projecting onto others when they speak. I'm assuming most of us have met or dealt with these kinds of people at least once in my life. And boy oh boy, does my jealous neighbor sure take the cake on this one. Now, I'm not a cocky person, but I am confident and proud of myself and where I have landed in life. I did come from a pretty poor upbringing and we have lived in a not so safe neighborhood. My parents did the absolute best with what they could, but it was hard at times and I was not naive to their struggles. So, when I was old enough to work, I started applying to jobs right away. Flash forward to my mid-20s and I was able to buy a house with my boyfriend. Yes, buy. You couldn't believe how happy I was to actually own my living space. Obviously, we had to make payments and we had a mortgage, but I was no longer just throwing money away towards rent for a property that I didn't even own. I thought that no one could ruin this feeling for me. This was until I met my lovely neighbor. We will call her Karen. Because of our work schedules, the only shared day off my boyfriend and I had was Sunday. Sundays were meant for cleaning up the house and relaxing, nothing too fancy, and you know, I did not think it would cause so many problems for our lovely neighbor Karen. When my boyfriend and I cleaned the house, we made it fun. Most Sundays we would wake up around 8 AM to clean the house and then go out to lunch or shopping afterwards. And by the way guys, waking up on a Sunday at 8 AM to clean the house does not sound like that much fun, but I guess to each their own. When we cleaned, we usually put on some music to entertain us, plus who does not love a good tune? Well, it seems like Karen does not. The first time she called the police on us, yes, the first time, this happened multiple times, was because we were cleaning our house on a Sunday and we were making too much noise. It's funny though, because the only noise you could really hear coming from our house was our music. And even then, you could not even hear it unless you were right up against our yard or property line, so I know she had to be snooping around. Anyway, she called the police on us without even asking us to turn it down or anything like that, which was pretty ridiculous if you ask me. When the police officers came to our door, we were so confused. We had no idea why they were there, and then they told us they received a noise complaint. First of all, am I the only one who thinks a noise complaint is a ridiculous reason to call the police? A noise complaint is not an emergency. We find out from the police officer that it was indeed our lovely neighbor Karen. And don't worry, you'll be thrilled to know that the police officers were just as confused as we were. We still had the music playing at the same volume as we did before, so the police officers could hear that we were not blasting music at a loud or disruptive volume. When they told Karen this, she freaked out and started saying how it is a shame how disrespectful the police officers have come and how we, my boyfriend and I, should be ashamed for bringing our disruptive activities into a quiet neighborhood. What? Disruptive activities? Do you mean vacuuming while playing music? I was truly at a loss. Regardless though, I was going to keep my house clean, and as a matter of fact, my boyfriend and I had decided to rent a small dumpster in order to junk some stuff both of us had accumulated during our move. It was nothing big, just some old furniture pieces and some personal belongings that we were not using any longer. It was a pretty small dumpster, but it was perfect for what we needed. Our neighbor did not like this either. She once again called the police officers, not only because we were making too much noise supposedly by throwing stuff in the dumpster, but she also claimed we were selling drugs out of the dumpster. I cannot make this up, people. However, this is also where the story gets fun, for my boyfriend and I at least, since the police are out at our house inspecting our dumpster. My boyfriend decides to tell the police officers that there is a strange smell coming from our neighbor's house and she was just trying to use our dumpster as a way to cover it up / distract people. This was not entirely untrue, there was in fact a strange smell coming from her house. And she did have a pile of junk in the backyard, so we figured it was just that. What ended up happening though was shocking to all of us. The police decide to check it out since they are already out here, and they could hardly get into her house because it turns out that Karen is an extreme hoarder. Like, to the point where her bedroom had stuff packed all the way up to the ceiling. It honestly was a shock. Of course, the police ended up having to report this to the city, and she had a certain amount of time to clean it up before she would get evicted, as she was just a renter, not an owner. Even though we had bad blood, we tried to be nice and help her out. I don't know a lot about hoarding, but I knew it could be considered a mental illness. However, she refused help. As a matter of fact, she refused any help. We learned that her sister had tried to get her to clean up several times, and each time it was a massive fail, and ending up with them not speaking to each other for weeks and even months at a time. Karen did end up getting evicted from the house, which does suck, but I definitely learned that you cannot help people that don't want to be helped, but you also cannot help Karens. And yeah guys, on the one hand, I am really happy for OP that he does not have to deal with this awful neighbor anymore, but still it is always sad to see people with mental health issues getting evicted from their homes. I hope Karen is now in a better place. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.